The Euphrates River is drying up, and this isn't just nature taking its course. The Bible warned us this day would come, and when those waters disappeared, hidden forces that have been imprisoned would awaken. We're talking about fallen angels, divine judgment, and the end times knocking at our door. Sound like an exaggeration? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover might be the most significant prophetic warning of your lifetime. The Euphrates River is drying up, and this goes far beyond an environmental disaster. This is the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy, a direct sign of the end times. What the media won't show you, and what many pulpits are afraid to address, is that in the silence of these vanishing waters, we're hearing the echoes of God's judgment. There are hidden things in that dry riverbed that should never have been awakened, but they're already preparing to rise. And we're not talking about myths or metaphors here. We're talking about imprisoned fallen angels, demons prepared for the final hour, and a revelation that the world prefers to ignore. While most people think this is just another climate crisis, the Bible already warned us. In Revelation 16:12, it's written that the great Euphrates River would dry up to prepare the way for the kings from the east. This text isn't symbolic. It's not some forgotten fairy tale. It's the prophetic roadmap for what we're witnessing with our own eyes. The collapse is underway, the spiritual clock is ticking, and the more water drains away, the more darkness comes to light. Before we continue, here's what I need you to do. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell. This message needs to spread, and you could be the instrument of warning for those who are still asleep. What you're about to hear isn't conspiracy theory, it's prophecy being fulfilled. This isn't meant to scare you, it's meant to wake you up. Because when you understand the signs, you realize there's no time left to waste. The fall has already begun, and the end is approaching with giant steps. Now get ready, because what's about to be revealed will shake your understanding of both the present and the future. Most people look at the Euphrates River drying up and think, oh, just nature doing its thing. Totally normal. But hold on a second. What if this drought isn't just some side effect of climate change, but actually a screaming message from above? That's exactly what catches your attention right away. This isn't presented as some simple geographic phenomenon. It's treated as a spiritual alarm bell, an urgent wake-up call for those who are actually paying attention to the final signs. The title alone sets the tone. It gets worse, intense revelation. Pretty intense, right? This kind of headline isn't just meant to shock you. It's designed to poke that little voice in your conscience, the one that whispers, something big is happening here, and am I completely missing it? Because here's the thing, what looks completely natural on the surface actually carries prophetic weight that most people just aren't ready to face head on. Now picture this, you're watching a video like this after a long, exhausting day. Your brain is already fried, and suddenly you're hit with content that blends mystery, judgment, and prophecy all together. It's the kind of thing that'll keep you up at night. The whole narrative is crafted to make you feel like you're stuck in the middle of some apocalyptic movie. But here's the kicker. You're not just watching it unfold, you're living it. That sense of urgency builds with every sentence, like time itself is racing against us. And honestly, it kind of is. The apocalypse isn't some distant fiction anymore. It's knocking on our door through news headlines, through rivers running dry, and through messages that way too many people are still choosing to ignore. This approach really messes with both your mind and your spirit. By connecting theology with current events, this kind of content puts viewers in a state of spiritual high alert, like some kind of internal watchfulness. It's basically saying, wake up! The Euphrates is drying up, and that's no coincidence. We all know the Bible is packed with signs, and Jesus himself warned that in the last days we'd see wars, famines, earthquakes, signs in the heavens and on earth, Matthew 24:6-7. But when these signs actually show up, Are we really prepared to interpret them? Or do we just prefer to stay distracted, caught up in the endless cycle of daily routine? Here's where it gets really interesting. This apocalyptic approach, with its almost conspiracy theory vibe, isn't exactly new, but it has become more accessible, more visual, more intense than ever before. In the past, people would read scripture and quietly meditate on these things. Today, they're watching videos with dramatic soundtracks, powerful imagery, and deep voices declaring, "The revelations have arrived." The emotional impact is real and completely intentional. The message doesn't just want to inform you, it wants to shake you up, in a good way, to wake up anyone who's been spiritually sleepwalking, and maybe, just maybe, bring back those who've drifted away from the truth. What's most fascinating and unsettling is that this message doesn't present itself as fiction, but as an interpretation of prophetic reality unfolding right now. It doesn't invite viewers to fear the future, but to see the present through spiritual eyes. He who has ears, let him hear, as Revelation 2:7 says. And that's where things start getting really heavy, because if the Euphrates drying up is already happening right before our eyes, what else from Scripture is being fulfilled right now, without us even noticing it? Think about it for a moment. How many times have we witnessed events that seemed purely natural or political, only to realize later that they fit perfectly into prophetic patterns? The challenge isn't just recognizing these signs when they're obvious. It's developing the spiritual awareness to see them as they're happening in real time. This is where the whole thing becomes personal. It's not just about watching world events unfold from a distance. It's about asking ourselves, are we spiritually awake enough to recognize what's happening? Are we paying attention to the signs, or are we too caught up in our daily lives to notice that history and prophecy might be accelerating around us? When you mention apocalypse, what immediately comes to mind? Chaos, right? Trumpets blaring, divine judgments, mysterious beasts, and of course, the enigmatic Armageddon. And right in the middle of all this powerful symbolism, the Euphrates River emerges as a crucial piece of the puzzle. There in Revelation 16:12, it's written, "The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river, Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings from the east." This verse isn't just some random prophetic detail, it's an eschatological bombshell. It marks a turning point in divine judgment, signaling that the time of mercy is running out and the time of harvest, whether for salvation or condemnation, is approaching fast. The video dives headfirst into this literal interpretation, treating the drying of the Euphrates as tangible evidence that this prophecy is being fulfilled in our lifetime. And that's where a lot of people get that chill down their spine, because if this is actually true, what else is coming along with it? The idea that the kings of the East are mobilizing isn't just geopolitics, it's in prophecy being fulfilled. And here's what's really interesting. The text doesn't say, maybe the water will dry up, or deal at some symbolic moment. It says the angel poured out the bowl and the water dried up. It's direct, no beating around the bush. Now think about this with me. How many times in the Bible did God's judgments come accompanied by physical signs? In nature, the Red Sea parting, the Jordan River drying up, the earth shaking at Calvary. There's definitely a pattern here. God speaks through creation. And if the Euphrates is drying up today, could we be witnessing a silent cry from heaven? This content reinforces that connection between the tough visible and invisible, between geography and divine judgment. And it's this bridge between the natural and spiritual that makes the message so powerful and so uncomfortable for a lot of people. What's most fascinating, or terrifying, depending on your perspective, is that this prophecy in Revelation 16 doesn't stand alone. It comes after a series of catastrophic events. Plagues, darkness, death, blasphemy. All of this happens before the verse that mentions the Euphrates. In other words, the setting isn't peaceful, it's one of thy intense tribulation. And when the text says the kings of the east will march, it's because the stage is being set for a final confrontation. Armageddon. And if the stage is already being prepared, where exactly do we fit into this story? A lot of people read these passages and think, oh, that's all future stuff long after I'm gone. But is it really? What if the prophesied future has already begun? What we're seeing today, with the Euphrates drying up right there on camera, might just be the tip of the iceberg. The time of revelations may have started, and the final signs are already visible to everyone. The question hanging in the air is, are our spiritual eyes open enough to recognize it? Or will we need the half-fallen angels to show up in flesh and blood before we finally wake up? The simple image of the dried-up Euphrates is already spine-chilling. But what really takes your breath away is what, according to the Bible, was hidden there all along. In Revelation 9:14-15, we're hit with a heavy revelation. Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. Yeah, you read that right. 4 fallen angels imprisoned there, waiting for the exact moment to be set free. The question that won't leave you alone is, if the river is drying up, could they already be getting released? This messes with your imagination and your spirit. We're not talking about some urban legend here. We're talking about biblical revelation, clear as daylight. This is where the narrative really shakes up the viewer's spiritual foundation, because now it's not just about divine judgment. It's about hidden entities, imprisoned since ancient times, who apparently will play a crucial role in the final tribulation. These angels, according to the text, were appointed to kill 1/3 of mankind. Pretty intense, right? And here's the most impactful part. They weren't released randomly. There's a specific time marked for their freedom. This shows how everything is under divine control, even when chaos seems to rule. It's impossible not to think about how this revelation connects with today's world. We're witnessing wars, pandemics, collapsing morality, nature crying out, and the Euphrates drying up. Does it seem like invisible doors are opening now, or what? And here's something to think about. How many spiritual things are happening around us that we don't even notice? Maybe because we're too busy with notifications and distractions. But those who are paying attention, who read scripture with discernment, can feel in their spirit that something big is coming, and it's already started. Now, this whole talk about fallen angels might sound like movie stuff, but biblically speaking, it's dead serious. These aren't cartoon characters with black wings. They're spiritual intelligences with real authority, who once had a place in heaven and now operate in heavenly realms. Ephesians 6:12. They represent forces that go way beyond what we can see. And their release isn't just literal, but symbolic too. It's like a wave of deception, destruction, and spiritual coldness is being unleashed on the world. Who hasn't felt in recent years a heaviness in the air, a collective discouragement, a widespread oppression? If what we're seeing now is just the preview of these beings being released, then we need to keep our eyes and hearts wide open. The river is drying up, the angels are lurking, and the next phase of the prophetic plan already seems to be in motion. But hold on, this isn't time for despair, it's time for understanding. Because as these ancient secrets has come to light, the responsibility of those who have knowledge also grows. And those who have knowledge need to discern the final signs under det shut with wisdom. You know that type of content that you watch and suddenly feel your heart racing, like something inside you just got activated? That's exactly the effect this kind of video creates when it uses phrases like "it gets worse" and "intense revelation." It's not just choosing strong words, it's a conscious strategy to build spiritual tension. The viewer doesn't just absorb information, they're led to feel, to fear, to reflect. The language is loaded, almost like a cry echoing inside your mind. Wake up, it's happening right now. And honestly, in a world numbed by empty news and digital distractions, maybe this kind of shock is exactly what some souls need. It's fascinating to notice how this content combines powerful visual imagery with hard-hitting biblical passages. By showing the dried-up bed of the Euphrates with intense music in the background and a narrator speaking in solemn tones, it creates a cinematic atmosphere, but with real weight behind it. This isn't fiction, this is prophecy, taking shape, and the feeling that settles in is that the clock is ticking, the signs are in the air, and time is running out. This combination of emotion, spirituality, and urgency is what makes the content so magnetic. Nobody watches indifferently. There's a subtle but powerful detail here. All this intensity isn't there just to scare people. It serves an educational purpose. The Bible actually uses this same approach many times. The prophets didn't speak softly. Elijah challenged kings. John the Baptist cried out in the wilderness. Jesus himself used harsh words when he needed to wake up the crowd. Matthew 23, for example. So when this type of content adopts that direct, heavy, unfiltered tone, it's not being over the top, it's being prophetic. And that, my friend, makes people uncomfortable, because truth hurts. But it's the hurt that awakens. This kind of intensity also exposes a collective spiritual wound. Why do you think so many people feel uncomfortable hearing apocalyptic messages? Maybe because these messages expose a reality we'd rather ignore. It's easier to laugh at memes than to face the possibility that we might be living in prophetic times. But Scripture already warned that in the last days, many would grow tired of the truth and follow myths instead. 2 Timothy 4:3-4. And meanwhile, judgment keeps approaching, becoming more visible each day, like a storm on the horizon. At the end of the day, the alarming tone isn't random. It reflects our current spiritual climate, a dry land, a distracted people, and signs everywhere. We're facing a great heavenly warning, the kind of alert that either paralyzes us or propels us forward. And every image, every quoted verse, every emotionally charged word serves to activate a sense of urgency that the church has long allowed to fall asleep. And if this cry is echoing now, it's because something even deeper is coming, and you can already hear the sound of marching, even if it's still in the distance. The Euphrates River drying. Climate or apocalypse? This is where our conversation takes a fascinating turn, because when we talk about the Euphrates River drying up, the question that immediately surfaces is this just climate change, or is the apocalypse actually unfolding before our eyes? And here's where things get really interesting, my friend. Opinions are completely split down the middle. Scientists point to climate change, reckless water usage, and dams built by countries like Turkey and Syria as the culprits. Meanwhile, Bible scholars, especially those who pay close attention to the prophecy, see this as a possible literal fulfillment of Revelation 16:12. So we're looking at the exact same scenario, but the lens we use to view it changes everything. Here's what we can't argue with. The physical event is real. The Euphrates is actually drying up. This isn't speculation or theory. We have satellite images, hard data, news reports. But the spiritual question isn't about what our eyes can see. It's about what our hearts can discern. Some people look at this and shrug, saying, "Hey, it's happening to rivers all over the world." Others read their scriptures and get that spine-tingling feeling that comes when you realize the supernatural might be hiding behind the natural. After all, the Bible never promised that prophetic signs would come with giant neon signs, reading, "Prophetic fulfillment happening here." Quite the opposite. Jesus warned that many people wouldn't even notice when these things began to unfold. Luke 17:26-30. Let me give you a practical analogy here. Think about a clock. Most of the time, we don't hear the tick-tock, but it's still running, right? That's exactly how prophecies work. They keep moving forward even when the world is completely distracted by other things. When we consider the literal context of this drought alongside the prophetic context, we start to understand that these two perspectives don't cancel each other out, they actually overlap. The natural points to the spiritual. The visible reveals the invisible. And maybe that's what these viral videos are trying to communicate with such intensity. Don't fall asleep while a prophetic clock is about to hit zero. But not everyone's on board with this interpretation. Respected theological resources like gotquestions.org explain that the fulfillment of this revelation prophecy is still in the future, specifically during the Great Tribulation, period, after the rapture. They argue that while the current drought is absolutely real, we're not yet at the moment when Eastern armies will march across the dried riverbed toward Armageddon. In other words, some see today's situation as a preview, not the actual fulfillment. And honestly, this debate is healthy. It encourages deeper study, and more importantly, it forces us to examine the world around us through the lens of Scripture, not the other way around. The big takeaway here is that spiritual discernment needs to walk hand in hand with practical knowledge. It's not enough to simply know that the river has dried up. We need to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Revelation 2:29. And even if this current drought isn't the drought mentioned in biblical prophecy, it's already serving as a massive wake-up call. We're getting closer and closer to something significant, and if the signs are aligning now, what comes next might go far beyond anything we can imagine. There's something absolutely fascinating that happens when you look at the Bible through the lens of historical context. What many people dismiss as mere symbolism, others see as a sacred timeline that's actually unfolding right before our eyes. And the Euphrates River, which once served as the backdrop for great empires like Babylon, now appears in Revelation as the stage for murky prophecies about the end times. Here's what most people don't know. The prophet Jeremiah had already spoken about Babylon's destruction and the drying up of its waters. Jeremiah 50:38. Coincidence? Not even close. Scripture confirms itself. And history? Well, history is simply the echo of eternity. Many Bible scholars divide prophetic fulfillment into three categories: past, present, and future. And the Euphrates fits into all three. In the past, it was a symbol of judgment against corrupt empires. In the present, it's serving as both a geopolitical and spiritual thermometer. In the future, according to Revelation, it will be the stage for Eastern armies moving toward Armageddon. This shows us that biblical prophecies have layers. They're not like those shallow horoscope predictions you see online, but rather like divine codes with applications across different time periods, all pointing toward the same ultimate outcome: final judgment. And here's what's even more incredible. This historical interpretation doesn't weaken the spiritual dimension, it actually strengthens it. Anyone who studies the Bible deeply starts to notice how God has always used the same patterns: warning, mercy, judgment. This cycle repeated with Israel, with the Gentile nations, and according to Scripture, it will repeat on a global scale. Today's drought in the Euphrates could be both a natural consequence and a prophetic sign being replayed. Because the Lord is the same yesterday, today, and forever, Hebrews 13:8. And He's still speaking, even though few people are actually listening. For anyone wanting to understand this perspective better, I highly recommend studying the books of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Revelation together. They complement each other perfectly. It's like putting together a prophetic puzzle. And if you want to go even deeper, check out books like The Great Controversy by Ellen G. White or The History of the Future by Douglas Gonsalves, works that dive into eschatology with both depth and clarity. This kind of study doesn't just expand your mind, it strengthens your faith, because it reveals that everything is part of a master plan and nothing happens by accident. The historical prophetic interpretation, therefore, isn't just some theological whim. It's a key that helps us discern what's truly prophetic and what's just temporary. It reminds us that the same mistakes keep repeating throughout history, and that God, in His love and justice, also repeats His warnings. The difference is that this time the signs seem much more obvious and time appears to be running much shorter. The Bible has always spoken through symbols, and the book of Revelation is the ultimate expression of this coded language, but anyone who thinks these symbols are vague or irrelevant is seriously mistaken. On the contrary, each symbol carries immense spiritual and historical weight. A perfect example is the 4 fallen angels mentioned in Revelation 9:14. They're bound at the Euphrates River, waiting for the exact hour, day, month, and year that God has appointed for them to act. That alone carries massive symbolic significance. A predetermined time, imprisoned beings, and a river that represents the boundary between light and darkness. Pretty intense, right? These angels don't just appear randomly. They represent spiritual forces of destruction, designated to fulfill a specific portion of divine judgment. When the text says they will kill a third of mankind, it's not just pointing to literal action, but to a global collapse, moral, spiritual, maybe even military. And it's fascinating how this symbolism connects to what we already see in our world: rising violence, wars, the breakdown of values. It's as if these forces are already being released gradually. What once existed only in the spiritual realm is starting to take physical form. Prophecy is beginning to clothe itself in reality. The symbolism in Revelation never stands alone. It always points to something greater. The beast isn't just a mythological figure. It represents corrupt systems. The bowls of wrath aren't just objects. They're acts of judgment and being poured out on humanity. The Euphrates River itself, in this context, becomes more than just a waterway. It's the boundary between what was and what's coming. The final barrier before the full manifestation of the cursed tribulation. And when that river dries up, what was bound begins to emerge. It's almost as if the symbol is screaming, "Time's up." Here's a practical tip. When you read Revelation, don't try to understand everything rationally on your first read-through. Ask questions of the text. Ask what each symbol represents throughout the Bible as a whole. Where else does it appear? What function does it serve? This exercise is incredibly enriching. For example, these fallen angels also appear in Genesis 6, Jude 1:6, and 2 Peter 2:4. In every case, they're connected to disobedience and temporary imprisonment. In other words, Revelation is closing a story that began way back at the beginning. The symbolism doesn't invent anything new. It concludes something that was already in motion. Therefore, apocalyptic symbolism isn't decoration. It's code. It's as if heaven speaks to those who are paying attention through images that only the spiritually awakened can decipher. And here's what's interesting. The more these symbols manifest in reality, the clearer it becomes that we're not living in normal times. We're living in days of revelation. And if the world still treats all this as exaggeration, maybe it's because the next phase hasn't fully revealed itself yet. But before we dive any deeper, let's plant our feet firmly on the ground for a moment. The drought affecting the Euphrates River didn't just appear out of thin air. There are very real natural and human factors behind this situation. The low climate tone has been changing at an accelerated pace, increasingly scarce rainfall, extreme summers, and rising global temperatures. Beyond that, the geopolitics of water in this region is a harsh reality. Countries like Turkey, Syria, and Iraq are fighting over every drop that flows through there. Dams, river diversions, and excessive agricultural use have been slowly draining what was once one of civilization's most important waterways. But here's where the spiritual twist comes in. Because God often uses the natural to reveal the supernatural. It's as if the Lord is saying, look, even what you thought was eternal can dry up. The Euphrates has always been a symbol of abundance, of boundaries, of dominion. Now, dried up, it becomes a symbol of judgment. Even the climatic and political factors are under God's control. This doesn't eliminate human responsibility, but it reveals that nothing escapes the divine agenda. So, even when it seems like random chance, it's not. Prophecies move within human history, and this connection between climate, politics, and prophecy is much more common than it appears. In ancient Egypt, God used natural plagues to confront Pharaoh. Elijah prayed and the heavens closed. It didn't rain for 3 years, 1 Kings 17:1. And in Revelation, we see extreme climatic phenomena as part of the Sassoon final judgment. So yes, there might be global warming, there might be poor management, but that doesn't negate the fact that God is using all of this as a heavenly megaphone. Because the human heart only awakens when something tangible, something earthly, begins to crumble. From a strategic standpoint, the Euphrates is also crucial. It cuts through a region full of tension: Iraq, Syria, Turkey. This is the route through which the armies mentioned in Revelation 16:12 could come. In other words, the literal drought opens the path for a geopolitical and military fulfillment of prophecy. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's geographical reading of a prophetic text, and in this scenario everything aligns: a dried river, growing tension in the Middle East, and a world in moral and spiritual collapse. Sounds like a movie script, but it's pure scripture. At the end of the day, what we call climate change and diplomatic crises might simply be the way God has chosen to capture our attention on a global scale. The Euphrates drought is more than an environmental problem. It's a wide-open warning, a reminder that tribulation time is approaching, and that even the earth groans, as Paul said in Romans 8:22. And if creation is crying out, are God's children listening? It's fascinating to observe how different religious communities are reacting to the Euphrates drought. While some raise their hands to heaven declaring, "The Lord is coming back," others respond calmly, "Let's analyze this with balance." And this division reveals something profound. The way we interpret signs says a lot about our spirituality. Some churches see Revelation as a literal compass, viewing every current event as an exact fulfillment of prophecy. Others prefer a more symbolic approach, treating the book as a narrative of hope amid chaos, not as an eschatological timeline. But one thing is certain: the video that puts the Euphrates at the center of this conversation stirs up everyone. For the more fervent believers, it's confirmation that judgment is knocking at the door. For skeptics within the churches themselves, it's just another coincidence. This diversity of opinions, while legitimate, also reveals a certain lack of preparation in the contemporary church for dealing with deep prophetic themes. Often, talking about fallen angels, tribulation, and Armageddon is seen as alarmism or fanaticism. But when the Bible presents these as central themes, ignoring them becomes spiritual negligence. This is why spiritual leaders need courage. Courage to not only speak about love and grace, which are essential, but also to teach about judgment, final signs, and revelations. Because faith that doesn't prepare for the future can't sustain in the present. In many churches, topics like Revelation are still treated as taboo. Some leaders avoid them out of fear of causing confusion or appearing radical, but hiding biblical truths out of fear of reaction is like a doctor concealing a serious diagnosis to avoid frightening the patient. And worse yet, while God's people avoid the topic, the world consumes distorted versions of it in movies and conspiracy theories. The good news is, there's a remnant, a group within the church that thirsts to understand what's happening. People who study, who pray, who ask, "Lord, what do you want to show me through all this?" And these people are often the ones who cause the most discomfort because they break the comfortable silence. They question superficiality and cry out for solid teaching. They're like the sons of Issachar, who had understanding of the times, by 1 Chronicles 12:32. And when they speak, it's not to cause fear, it's to awaken, because only those who understand the time they're living in can act with wisdom. So the question hanging in the air is, how has your community been reacting to these signs? The Euphrates drought is right there, recorded by satellites, broadcast in videos, discussed from pulpits, and ignored by many. Maybe we're experiencing not just an ecological collapse, but a crisis of spiritual discernment. And if the church, which is the pillar of truth, doesn't take a stand, who's going to interpret the signs? When we talk about the Euphrates drought and the prophecies of Revelation, it's easy to fall into two extremes, panic or indifference. But there's a much more powerful path, that of spiritual responsibility. Yes, responsibility, because if we're witnessing end-time signs being fulfilled, the right question isn't what's happening, but rather, what should I do about this? Every revelation carries a call to action. And that action starts in the heart, passes through the mind, and extends to our attitudes. In other words, we can't keep living on autopilot when everything around us is screaming that we're in prophetic times. A river's drought might seem like something distant until you understand that it also represents a drought of values, of ethics, of truth. When the water disappears, what was hidden becomes visible. The dried riverbed of the Euphrates could be a symbol that the mask of the modern world has fallen off. And then comes the confrontation. Are we prepared to deal with what God is revealing? Or will we keep pretending nothing unusual is happening? Spiritual ethics is exactly this, living with eyes wide open, discerning the times, and taking a stand before truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And here's a practical application that few people make. You can start responding spiritually by changing your environment. How? Turn off what distracts you. Pray with more intention. Seek to study the Word with depth. Start with Revelation itself, supported by trustworthy eschatology books like The End Times by Tim LaHaye, or even devotional series. Beyond that, it's time to teach your children, dialogue with your family, prepare your home spiritually, because if we fallen angels are being released, we need the Lord's angels at our doors. Another essential point is that this type of content also demands a collective ethical response. The church needs to rise up not just to warn, but to embrace. There's an entire generation that's disoriented, seeking explanations in the occult, in astrology, in conspiracy theories, all because they're not finding solid biblical answers. This is an urgent call to spiritual leaders. It's time to teach, to disciple, to open spaces for difficult questions. It's no longer enough to just sing and preach light messages. These times demand preparation for difficult times. In the end, the Euphrates drought isn't just an event, it's a mirror that reflects both the state of the world and the state of the church. And maybe the greatest, intense revelation this sign brings us is that we need to return to the origins of faith, to the fear of the Lord, to the holiness that prepares the way. Because if all this is happening before our eyes, it's because something even greater is yet to come. And now that you've seen all of this, let me ask you something. Do you still think we're living in normal times? Because when even the Euphrates dries up and buried truths begin to emerge, we can't keep calling it mere coincidence. If even the rivers are crying out, how can we remain silent? What you've encountered here today wasn't just information, it was a call, an alert, and maybe, for some of you, a spiritual awakening. Now the question is, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to close this video and go on with life as if nothing happened? Or will you use this knowledge to open other people's eyes, dive deeper into the Word, and position yourself spiritually? Because, let's be honest, we can't keep playing at being Christians anymore. Either we wake up or we get swallowed by the system. So tell me in the comments, which part impacted you the most? Do you believe we're witnessing the fulfillment of prophecies? I want to hear your thoughts. And listen, don't keep this message to yourself. Share it with someone you love. This is a generation that needs truth, not distractions. Time is running out, and the signs are screaming. And those who have discernment understand that we can't waste time on what doesn't matter. You can start today, with prayer, with Bible study, with action. You could be the difference between someone waking up or staying asleep. If you've made it this far, it's because God is calling you to something greater. And I encourage you, don't go back to the superficial. Stay strong, seek more, ask questions, study, pray, fast, share. And if you want to walk together on this journey of revelation, subscribe to the channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next content, and leave that like so more people can be reached. Because the river might dry up, but God's purpose for your life will still overflow.